I'm making another album. And since the last episode, where I made the plan to focus on recording vocals and recording the live parts and getting the best takes I could of them in the time available before doing any of the other production stuff, I've hit more than a few obstacles. And most of these obstacles are around my recording situation. If right now you can hear, for instance, rain, that's because I'm in my studio and it's got a tin roof. It's literally a shed. So I'm using a plugin to get rid of the sound. The thing is, that plugin significantly changes what's being recorded. I mean, it's still pretty amazing because right now, if it sounds like I'm shouting a bit, it's because it's incredibly loud. But, you know, when you're recording songs, sometimes you don't want that kind of processing on it. And particularly a few of my songs want to be really quiet and very little instrumentation. One of the songs on the album is simply a piano and a voice, and it kind of needs to be that. It has to be that. So I want the best possible recording situation with the least possible extraneous noise. So when I started recording yesterday morning, after 8 o'clock, it was basically impossible to record the songs which require that very clean sound, because I'm in the middle of the countryside and there's a load of people who seem to very much enjoy mowing, and they have those very big mowers because they've got quite a bit of grass to mow, and there was 3 of those going yesterday, on top of the fact that our dryer is in the garage behind the one I'm in, which is separated literally behind just a sheet of metal. And on top of that, there's birds flying around all over the place. And if it's not rain, and you know the sound of the rain on the roof, when the sun hits the roof and it heats up, the roof starts cracking and popping, making sounds like that. So to be honest with you, recording vocals beyond 8 a.m. in the day isn't the ideal situation to be in. But one of the things I've noticed in a lot of people when they're thinking about making albums is that they would put my kind of a situation in front of making the album. So they'd say, well, I can't make an album right now because I've got this less than ideal recording situation. But I'm not letting that stop me make an album. In fact, the reason that I'm making an album is because I have these problems with my setup. Now you might go, what on earth are you talking about, Mike? Here's what I mean. If I hadn't committed to making albums, if I hadn't committed to you and to my Making Album with Mike people and to my family and to the coaches and to the wider world, if I hadn't committed to this album, these obstacles would be barriers. But because I have committed to this album, they have simply become things I need to overcome. For example, it's a great example this morning. I was meant to run a coach training session at 5 a.m. and I got up and I came into the studio and I was like, my goodness, it's really, really quiet in here. All there was the sound of a single lone mole cricket. So just one cricket was the only sound that I could hear. So I was thinking, oh my goodness, this would be an ideal time for me to record this song that is just me and the piano. Because the other thing is, I knew that today, and apparently, according to the weather anyway, for the next week, it's going to be raining all the time. So that makes it even more difficult. So incredibly kindly, the coaches, they all came on at 5 a.m. because I realized this at the last minute. I asked them, would you mind if we put this off by a week so I could take this opportunity to record this vocal? Now, let me ask you, would I have done that, and would it have been fair for me to do that had I not been making an album? I mean, I wouldn't. There's no way that I would inconvenience everybody else on that coach training call with this recording session and saying, can we do it next week instead? Unless I had an album deadline. It was the album deadline that made it understandable. I still felt really bad, and I'm eternally grateful to the coaches for being so flexible. But there's no way I would have been able to do that had it not been for the album. So can you see how an album deadline, how committing to an album creates the conditions where time shows up, where you are able to overcome these problems? Of course, if it was earlier on in the album making process, I wouldn't do this. But this is the power of a deadline. Not only does it justify the time and the effort you're putting into your music to yourself, it does for others as well. It makes complete sense to them, because they make albums as well. It makes complete sense to them that I would do this in this particular situation. The same is true of my wife, Sally, who very kindly has, when I'm in the final stages of the album, picked up some of the work, putting the kids to bed, and there's absolutely no way, and I don't blame her, there's no way that she would say yes to that if it wasn't for these album deadlines. In fact, I only ever ask for her to do that, to do slightly more than she already does, which is an enormous amount. I only ask her to do that before an album deadline because it makes sense. There's a justification for it. So in other words, if you have a limitation in terms of setup, in terms of gear, in terms of time, even in terms of skills. Like skills is the same thing too. The vocals I have recorded so far, when I compare them to the vocals I recorded for the previous album, are way better. I can't believe it, but I'm actually going to have a track on this album where I am, in fact, maybe more than one track, a couple of tracks on this album, where I am playing the piano and singing at the same time. And I can't believe that I'm even able to do that. I mean, to be fair, both the vocal and the piano part are very, very simple. But there's absolutely no way I would have been able to do that had I not made the previous albums that I've made. Right, so if you feel that you have a lack of skill, that's not something that stops you from making an album. It's a reason to make an album, because an album is a forcing function. It means that you have to find ways around, through, over, under these obstacles. If you're lacking time, if you're lacking skills, if you're lacking the right situation, if you're lacking the justification for you making music, if you're lacking belief from other people or yourself to make music, then make an album. Commit to making an album. The best way to overcome the obstacles that seem to be in your way to making music is to commit to something, which means you have to. And of course, if you'd like my help to make an album, the new class of Make an Album with Mike is starting tomorrow. So all you have to do is click the link in the show notes to find out more about that. And with all that said, I'm going to stop talking about making an album and start making one.